Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a hidden medical epidemic affecting older adults. Imagine a simple stumble, like just tripping on a rug or even sitting down a bit too hard, turning into a complete, life-altering structural collapse. We're looking at comprehensive medical research to understand exactly how the very foundation of the human body is failing and how modern surgical engineering is stepping in to rebuild it from the inside out.
Okay, look at the staggering number, 64 to 89%. That represents the devastating loss of independence for older patients who end up hospitalized with pelvic fragility fractures. The research highlights that we aren't just talking about a broken bone here. It's a critical event that frequently robs people of their mobility, their daily routines, and their autonomy. And actually, these injuries carry a really high mortality rate too, ranging from 13 to 27%. So this is a massive systemic issue.
So let's start with part one, a growing hidden epidemic.
To understand why this is happening at such an alarming scale, especially to postmenopausal women over 55 and folks dealing with osteoporosis, you've kind of got to think of the human pelvis like a load-bearing architectural ring. Now, normally, this ring is a powerhouse. Biomechanical studies show it's designed to withstand up to 6,000 newtons of vertical force. It's incredibly strong. But when that bone weakens through osteoporosis, the foundation simply caves in on itself under normal, everyday stress. An insufficiency fracture doesn't act like a violent break from a car crash. It's much more like a weakened bridge, suddenly buckling under its own weight.
But here is what's truly alarming. Even when these fractures are caught and treated, a massive 71% of patients in Europe don't get adequate secondary osteoporosis prevention. Think about that. Only about 1 in 5 actually receive follow-up bone density diagnostics. We're essentially fixing the cracks in the wall, but completely ignoring the fact that the entire foundation is sinking, leaving these patients highly vulnerable to another collapse.
Moving on to part 2, spotting invisible pelvic fractures.
Now, diagnosing this takes some serious detective work. Patients usually don't come in with a massive, obvious trauma. They mostly just complain of some nonspecific lower back or buttock pain. It's an insidious onset that disguises a major structural failure as just an ordinary age-related ache. And standard x-rays, they have a shockingly low sensitivity for this. In fact, they can miss up to 98% of these specific sacral U-type fractures. 98%. So doctors are virtually forced to rely on CT scans to see the physical shape of the break and MRIs, which boast an incredible 99% sensitivity rate, making them the absolute gold standard for spotting the invisible.
And this image brilliantly illustrates what an invisible injury actually looks like when you use the right tools. This is an advanced SPECT CT scan. Notice those bright, glowing red and yellow hotspots? That is intense bone edema and stress within the pelvic ring that standard x-rays completely miss. Without this kind of advanced imaging, a patient could easily be sent home with a prescription for rest, totally unaware that their pelvis is actively failing.
Which brings us to part 3, the dangerous domino effect.
So what exactly happens if these hidden fractures go undiagnosed and untreated? If a patient is just sent home and told to take it easy? Well, we see a terrifying domino effect described in the medical literature as crescendo instability. It's tracked using something called the Ramans and Hoffman classification. It starts at FFP type 1, which is just a minor stable hairline fracture. But under the daily load of just walking and moving around, that minor injury progressively worsens. It travels from a stable front ring injury to a non-displaced posterior injury to a displaced fracture until it hits FFP type 4. That is a complete, highly unstable disconnection of the spine from the pelvis.
The data shows that about 40% of women with prolonged pain or restricted mobility go through this exact progression. An untreated minor fracture collapses further and further, ultimately resulting in chronic, immobilizing agony. You can actually see the journey right here in these panels, starting from a seemingly minor unilateral issue on the top left, cascading into a devastating bilateral failure that absolutely demands heavy hardware to correct. That leads us right into part 4, engineering a surgical fix. Let's look at the mechanical marvels of modern surgery. When the body's natural architecture fails and conservative treatment like resting just isn't enough, doctors essentially have to turn into structural engineers. To rebuild the foundation, surgeons use an escalating toolkit of hardware. For less severe fractures, they might do a sacroplasty. That involves injecting a specialized bone cement with a name that's an absolute mouthful, polymethylmethylacrylates. This binds the fractured bone and stops painful micromovements. But as instability increases, they escalate to heavy-duty sacroiliac screws, spanning plates, and steel bars across the pelvis to mechanically lock the broken pieces together.
Just look at this incredible engineering right here. This postoperative X-ray is a true testament to modern medicine. But there's a really unique challenge. You're trying to anchor heavy metal screws into weak, osteoporotic bone. Think about it. It's exactly like trying to drive a heavy screw into crumbling drywall. It just won't hold. So to keep these implants from simply tearing out under the body's weight, surgeons use cement-augmented screws. They inject cement through the screw itself into the surrounding bone to drastically improve the structural grip. For the absolute most severe cases, those FFP type 4 spinal pelvic dissociations where the spine is basically floating free from the hips, doctors use a highly invasive method called triangular lumbopelvic fixation. They place pedicle screws deep into the lower lumbar spine, run vertical rods down, and lock the whole thing together with horizontal transsacral screws. They are building a literal, rigid 3D scaffolding. It's the ultimate heavy-duty last resort to artificially anchor the spine back to the hips. Finally, Part 5, Restoring the Foundation. I know it sounds intense, and honestly, it is. But all of this biomechanical engineering, all the titanium and cement, serves one single, deeply human purpose: getting patients back on their feet and out of a hospital bed. Early detection combined with these highly tailored surgical strategies allows older adults to escape a bedbound fate. You can see a patient right here reclaiming his independence after a successful, complex stabilization. Without this intervention, the chronic pain and instability would have likely made standing or walking permanently impossible. Now, while resting a fracture is sometimes an option for the mildest cases, the research is pointing heavily toward proactive surgical stabilization. Get this. One study found that fracture progression happened in 18% of conservatively treated patients, compared to just 2.7% of those who had surgery. That is a massive, game-changing difference. The medical consensus is definitely shifting toward fixing the mechanics immediately to stop that crescendo effect and save lives. Which leaves us with a critical question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. We clearly have the brilliant surgical engineering required to fix the structural collapse. But if 71% of these patients aren't getting secondary osteoporosis care, well, we're feeling them before they even hit the operating table. How do we shift our focus to treat the underlying biological weakness, ensuring the foundation of the human body never crumbles in the first place? It's not just a medical challenge, it's a societal challenge that we absolutely must face head on.